ancient books it's written that a warrior will draw a burning sword from the fire. And that sword shall be Lightbringer.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones Season 8 theory video. In today's video, I want to update a theory I made about 6 months ago. When I was making my endgame predictions for each character, I made one about Melisandre, and I talked about what I think her ultimate purpose is. The first video I made on this topic was pretty good in my opinion, but I have read the books again, and I believe I found even more evidence that proves this theory to be true. There are a few different quotes that I think point directly to Melisandre being Nissa Nissa. And I know this prophecy is constantly mentioned these days, but almost everyone references Daenerys when they talk about Nissa Nissa. But at the end of the day, I think that's completely wrong. Now, I do have to say, the theory I want to show you today mostly relates to the books, because that's where I found most of these clues. Also, I know one of the recent plot leaks said Melisandre was Nissa Nissa, but I actually made the theory video 6 months before that leak came out. And now I want to show you why I believe Melisandre will have to give the ultimate sacrifice, because in order to create this ultimate weapon, Melisandre will need to die. First, let me set the stage for why I think a special weapon like Lightbringer will be needed. I think there is a very good chance that Jon and Daenerys cannot win this war with what they have. The Night King has a dragon, he has giants, and according to Daenerys, the Night King has 100,000 soldiers in his army that are built to fight in the snow. Plus, we know the Night King can add more soldiers to his army at pretty much any time. I believe that in order for Jon and Daenerys to win this war, they will need some kind of an X factor, some kind of an outside force that no one would see coming, which leads me to Melisandre. As we all know, this is the Song of Ice and Fire, and that title describes more than just one thing. It has been a theme throughout this entire series, and it will play its biggest part in the end. The Night King has a direct connection to ice. He can actually manipulate the ice into powerful weapons that can take down a dragon with a single strike. Jon and Daenerys will need a weapon that represents the fire side of things that the Night King cannot stop. Some of you may say they already have that weapon because they have fire-breathing dragons, but we already know the Night King can defeat dragons. He killed one dragon very easily. In my opinion, the dragons will not be the ultimate weapons. This will come down to 1 vs 1 combat. The Night King will have his magical ice weapon, and Jon will need a magical fire weapon. This is foreshadowed in the books, and it was also shown in the show. Now, in order for this weapon to be made, we have to look at the prophecy. This sword needs to be plunged into a heart that turns the fire and forges the blade, and Melisandre has that direct connection to the fire. She can see things in the flames, and she can even manipulate the flames. She might be doing that with her powders and potions, but she does have power inside of her. Melisandre has a fire burning inside of her, and this has been referenced more times than I can count. Melisandre also knows she will be needed to defeat the Night King. This was the very last thing she said to Jon Snow.
I've been ready to die for many years. If the Lord was done with me, so be it, but he's not. You've seen the Night King, Jon Snow. You know the Great War is still to come. You know the army of the dead will be upon us soon. And you know I can help you win that war.
Jon is going to need Melisandre to stop the Night King, but Melisandre will have to die in order for this to be done. Let me read the prophecy. How this is worded is very important because some of this wording is used again in other quotes about Melisandre and Jon. This prophecy was first laid out in a Davos chapter. Salladhor Saan tells him the story about Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa, and this is what he says. Do you know the tale of the forging of Lightbringer? I shall tell it to you. It was a time when darkness lay heavy on the world. To oppose it, the hero must have a hero's blade, like none that had ever been. And so for 30 days and 30 nights, Azor Ahai labored sleepless in the temple, forging a blade in the sacred fires. Heat and hammer and fold, heat and hammer and fold, oh yes, until the sword was done. Yet when he plunged it into water to temper the steel, it burst asunder. The second time it took him 50 days and 50 nights, and this sword seemed even finer than the first. Azor Ahai captured a lion to temper the blade by plunging it through the beast's red heart, but once more the steel shattered and split. Great was his woe and great was his sorrow then, for he knew what he must do. 100 days and 100 nights he labored on the third blade, and as it glowed white-hot in the sacred fires, he summoned his wife. Nissa Nissa, he said to her, for that was her name, bare your breast, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. She did this thing, why I cannot say, and Azor Ahai thrust the smoking sword through her living heart. It is said that her cry of anguish and ecstasy left a crack across the face of the moon, but her blood and her soul and her strength and her courage all went into the steel. Alright, now there is a lot to take in here, but some of this wording is the key to Melisandre being Nissa Nissa. I know some of you might get hung up on the part about Nissa Nissa needing to be Azor Ahai's wife, but I will explain why that's not exactly true. And some of you probably think the sword needs to be forged 3 times for this to work too, but I don't think that's necessarily true either. That needed to be done the first time, but it won't need to be done with Azor Ahai reborn, and I will explain that later as well. Now let's think about Melisandre's role in the story so far. If you've read the books, then you know all Melisandre talks about is Azor Ahai, and how he will be the one to defeat the darkness. Her life's work has been to find Azor Ahai and prepare him for when the time comes. Melisandre believes she found Azor Ahai in Stannis Baratheon. She believes he is the one, and she is constantly making sacrifices to help Stannis' cause. Melisandre has no problem with burning people alive at the stake. In fact, Melisandre believes death by fire is the purest death. The only problem is Melisandre is focusing on the wrong man, and you could even say she is making unnecessary sacrifices. I believe what Melisandre has been doing will be turned on its head, and Melisandre will need to make one last sacrifice, but this time she will have to give herself to the fire that's inside of her. She has already found the true Azor Ahai, but if she actually wants to help him defeat the Night King, she will have to give herself in order for this magical sword to be created. Melisandre has said there will come a day after a long summer when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world. In this dread hour, a warrior shall draw from the fire a burning sword, and that sword shall be Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes. And he who clasps it shall be Azor Ahai come again, and the darkness shall flee before him. Azor Ahai, beloved of R'hllor, the warrior of light, the son of fire. Now think about what Melisandre said. Azor Ahai, beloved of R'hllor, the warrior of light, the son of fire. That sounds a lot like Jon. Jon was brought back to life by R'hllor. You could say he was reborn, making him the son of fire. Jon is actually the son of ice and fire, but George only wrote fire right here because he only gives us bits and pieces at a time to not make it too obvious. Also, when Melisandre looks into the flames, she prays to R'hllor to give her just a glimpse of Azor Ahai's face, but whenever he shows her, all she can see is snow. R'hllor doesn't show her any sign that points to Stannis Baratheon because he's not the one. He's a pretender. R'hllor only shows Melisandre the snow, which obviously represents Jon. Another interesting thing that points to Jon being Azor Ahai is a dream he has in the most recent book. In A Dance with Dragons, Jon has a dream that he's standing on top of the wall. Jon is armored in black ice, but his blade burned red in his fist. Both of these clues are in the last book. George is slowly starting to reveal who this legendary figure will be. But now let me show you some other reasons why I believe Jon will need Melisandre to forge this sword in her burning heart. One of the most obvious clues is the symbol that represents Melisandre. It's something we have all seen 1,000 times, but we never put 2 and 2 together. Melisandre carries a banner that has a burning heart. This is exactly what will happen to Melisandre's heart once Jon plunges his sword into her chest. There is also another quote in one of Davos's chapters that talks about Melisandre, and it's worded exactly like the Nissa Nissa prophecy. I'm sure most of you remember the battle in Blackwater Bay. Do you remember how Davos's son was killed by the wildfire? Well, in the books, Davos actually loses multiple sons during this battle on the bay. And he's obviously very emotional and angry about this, and he wants to kill Melisandre because of this, among many other reasons. After Davos survives the battle, he lands on that rock, and he eventually gets rescued just like in the show. But as he is on his way back to Dragonstone, he starts thinking to himself about how he wants to kill Melisandre as soon as he gets there. And this is what he says: "I will cut the living heart from her breast and see how it burns." That's fascinating because it's very specific, and it's foreshadowing how Melisandre will actually die, but the wording is nearly identical to how Nissa Nissa died. Davos said he wants to cut into her bare breast and into her living heart to see how it burns. There is another reference to Melisandre having a burning heart, but it also says living heart, just like the prophecy mentions a living heart, and of course it burns after it's cut into, which will look exactly like Melisandre's banners. Now, I want to read another quote, and I just recently came across this one as I was reading the books again. When I saw this quote, it pretty much jumped off the page and slapped me right in the face, because I think these small details are actually another direct link to Melisandre being Nissa Nissa. When Jon and Melisandre rode in the cage together to the top of the wall, he notices some very interesting things about Melisandre. In the close confines of the iron cage, he was acutely aware of the Red Woman's presence. She even smells red. The scent reminded him of Mycon's forge, of the way iron smelled when red hot. The scent was smoke and blood, kissed by fire. Let me stop right there first because that is an absolute bombshell. Jon can smell Melisandre, and it reminds him of Mycon's forge, the same way iron smells when red hot. The scent was smoke and blood. That's fascinating because Melisandre basically smells exactly like Nissa Nissa would smell after the sword was forged in her heart. The sword smoked and burned as her blood poured over it, and that's exactly what Melisandre smells like, smoke and blood. Mycon's forge. Melisandre smells like a freshly forged sword because this is foreshadowing exactly what's going to happen to her. Why else is her body giving off that scent other than a calling to Jon about what needs to be done? But this isn't all that's said in the cage as they ride to the top of the wall. Jon notices that Melisandre is never cold. When it's freezing at the wall, even when you wear heavy furs. Jon even asks her this, "You are not cold, my lady?" All Melisandre does is laugh, and she says never. The ruby at her throat seems to pulse, in time with the beating of her heart. She says, "The Lord's fire lives within me, Jon Snow. Feel." Then she puts Jon's hand to her cheek and he held it there so he could feel how warm she was. Now do not forget that detail because that's very important also. Melisandre is always warm. She has a fire burning inside of her. Let me show you something else now. When Maester Aemon leaves the wall to go to the Citadel with Sam, he leaves one very important thing behind for Jon to read. He even marks the page for Jon because he knows Jon must see this. And can you guess what it's about? It's about Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa, but what Jon actually says when he reads it is fascinating as well. This is what Jon says. "I looked at the book Maester Aemon left me, the Jade Compendium, the pages that told of Azor Ahai. Lightbringer was his sword, tempered with his wife's blood, if Votar can be believed. Thereafter, Lightbringer was never cold to the touch, but warm as Nissa Nissa had been warm." Do you see the connection there? Nissa Nissa was always warm, just like Melisandre is always warm, and Nissa Nissa's life force forged into the blade, which is why the blade is always warm and basically glowing red. Nissa Nissa had a fire inside of her, just like Melisandre. But there is something else Jon said right there that I have to point out. Remember how I said Nissa Nissa doesn't have to be the person's wife? Well, look at what Jon said. The pages that told of Azor Ahai. Lightbringer was his sword, tempered with his wife's blood, if Votar can be believed. The way that last sentence is worded is very important because the detail about Nissa Nissa being Azor Ahai's wife needs to be put into question. Because Votar was the man who documented this prophecy, and I think that is George telling us that the last detail about it being his wife's blood may or may not be true. Nissa Nissa was not actually his wife, which means Melisandre does not need to be Jon's wife to fit the prophecy. Notice how Jon doesn't mention the sword being forged 3 times either? That's because Jon won't have to do that. He will only need to forge it once. He just needs to realize what he needs to do, which is one of the reasons why Maester Aemon left him this book in the first place. Jon needed to know that Stannis was not Azor Ahai, because Maester Aemon noticed Stannis' sword was cold to the touch, and the real Lightbringer should be warm if it was legit. But George doesn't just do things in his story for one reason and one reason only. That book will make Jon realize Stannis isn't Azor Ahai, and Jon will realize that his dream about him armored in black ice and holding a red burning sword in his hand relates to him being Azor Ahai. And he will need to plunge his sword into the person that has been sacrificing everyone for the wrong reasons. If Melisandre truly wants to help Azor Ahai, then she will give herself to the fire. She will give herself what she believes to be the purest death. She has the fire burning inside of her, and she needs to transfer that energy into Jon's sword, just like Nissa Nissa did thousands of years ago. When she looks into the flames for a glimpse of Azor Ahai, all she sees is snow. It doesn't get any more clear than that. There is another thing I want to show you before I end the video. There was actually a scene from the show where Melisandre told Jon they could make light together, and light is obviously short for Lightbringer. I can't show you the full scene because Melisandre is partially nude, but I will play all the audio. Listen very carefully to her words.
Do you feel my heart beating? There's power in you. You resist it, and that's your mistake. Embrace it. In our joining, there's power. Power to make life. Power to make light.
Jon puts his hand on Melisandre's bare breast, and she asks him if he can feel her heart. Sounds like another hint to the Nissa Nissa prophecy because Nissa Nissa bared her breast. Then the sword went into her heart and created Lightbringer. As Jon feels Melisandre's breast and her heart beating, Melisandre says Jon has power in him that he needs to embrace. Together they can make life. Together they can make light. Melisandre will bare her breast one last time, but Jon's sword will be the thing that feels her heart beat, and together they will make Lightbringer. Thoros of Myr once said great power requires great sacrifice. Melisandre left Westeros, but she knows she must come back to perform one final sacrifice. She has given so many people to the fire, but now it's only fitting that she gives herself in order to end this darkness that has come to lay over the world. It's no accident that they showed Gilly reading a page straight out of the World of Ice and Fire about Azor Ahai. This will all come into play in the end, and this is how I think it goes down. I feel like the evidence is overwhelmingly points to Melisandre being Nissa Nissa, but this is just my opinion. Let me know how you feel about this one. Did I provide enough clues, or are you still on the fence? Put all your thoughts and questions down below in the comment section. I know this was a long one, but I really appreciate those of you who made it until the end. And I also have to give a special shout out to everyone on Patreon supporting the channel. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.